time to look at it prior to tonight, but the ZBA is not meeting, so there's no.
Everyone else good? Good evening, board members and residents. I'd like to call to order our regular board meeting and public hearing for Monday, December 12th, 2016. And I'd ask that everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Batkins?
Here.
Mr. Batanti?
Here.
Mr. Servil?
Here.
Mr. Tominello?
Here.
Mr. York?
Here.
Mr. Witt, here. Mr. Verkust?
Here, thank you. Next on our agenda is the approval of the consent agenda, including approval of the regular board meeting minutes of November 28th, 2016, approval of the bills in the amount of $600,414.21, and approval of the 2017 meeting calendar. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda with bills in the amount of $600,414.21.
Is there support? Support. All right, support by Mr. Batanti. Discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, board. Next is the approval of the regular agenda. Board members, it's been requested that we remove item D3 regarding a ZBA appointment until we receive an attorney's opinion. And Mr. Huth, no problem in receiving that prior to the next time we meet?
That's correct.
Okay. Otherwise, we're looking for a motion to approve the agenda with the removal of item D3.
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Batanti, with support by Mr. York. Discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Next on our agenda is announcements. The first one is a very timely or important announcement. Due to the conditions of the roadways within Harrison Township, primarily residential roadways, GFL Environmental Services was not able to perform the collection for trash today, so collection for all residents in the township will be delayed one day from your regular collection schedule. GFL crews will be working this Saturday, and the regular collection schedule is expected to resume next week, starting Monday. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact our office, or you can contact GFL directly, 866-772-8900. But simply stated, just a one-day delay in waste collection. Yard waste collection ends for the year on your last scheduled collection day this week. And again, due to the condition of the roads, it's actually delayed one day. The yard waste collection will resume again April 3rd, and of course, we do, following the Christmas season, do pick up the trees. If you have concerns or questions about pending library events, you can visit www.htlibrary.org. And you can also follow them on Twitter at HarrisonTWPLIB. And for more information on any of these events, you can call the supervisor's office, 586-466-1445, or visit our website, harrison-township.org, or follow our Twitter lead at HarrisonTWPMI. Any other announcements? Tax bills or?
No. Tax bills have been mailed, and you should have had them in your mailbox. If you don't receive them, you can always check your tax bills online at harrison-township.org.
Any other announcements? Hearing none, we'll move on to our next item on the agenda. Item B1, opening of the public hearing for the budget.
Board members, we noticed in the paper the public hearing tonight for the purpose of reviewing our fiscal year 2017 budget tonight. It was noticed with the budgeted amounts as we had discussed based on the revisions we made during the budget workshop. So tonight we would open the public hearing, open the floor for people, residents are interested in speaking, it's the same 3-minute time limit. And we'll record those. If you do get up and speak, please make sure you state your name so we can get it in the record. After that, we'll close the public hearing, and it's up to the board to adopt our budget, whether as presented or with any changes.
All right. So the first bit of order is to open the public hearing.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Supervisor.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. York to open the public hearing at 7:09 PM. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. York?
Yes.
Mr. Batkins?
Yes.
Mr. Batanti?
Yes.
Mr. Servil?
Yes.
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Verkest?
Yes. All right, the floor is open. Anyone who wishes to comment on the budget?
William Bardell, 37865 Point Rosa, 20-year resident, New Breed. I just want to say about the budget, is there any way you can make it smaller so it's even harder to read off the internet? And make sure I have to turn my notebook the other sideways? What you want to do is you want to make it easy for the residents to read the budget, not hard, easy. That's all I have for you. Thank you. Make it easy to read and flip it, flip it vertical, so when you scroll down, it's easy to read. Oh, I did it again. Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, I'll be looking for a motion to close public comment.
Public hearing.
I'm sorry, the public hearing.
So moved.
Is there support?
Support.
Got a motion by Mr. Batanti with support by Mr. York to close the public hearing at 7:10 PM. Discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Mr. Batanti?
Yes.
Mr. York?
Yes.
Mr. Batkins?
Yes.
Mr. Servil?
Yes.
Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Verkest?
Yes. Next on our agenda would be, a motion would be in order to adopt our 2017 budget.
Yes, board members. I do have possibly one change. I don't know if we need to do it tonight. Due to Public Act 152, I think everybody knows that I get insurance through the school district. I've not taken that insurance in the last 12 years. But due to the Public Act, the co-pays and deductibles have gone up, much like Mr. Verkest, where we're now out of pocket about $5,400 for the upcoming year. And I do get currently $3,600 like any other employee would if you opt out of the insurance. So I'm debating at this point whether I'm going to take the township insurance or the Lance Cruise insurance. Costs us about $22,000, a year for insurance. I don't know if we need to make that
Well, we have
budget amendment tonight.
We have some
or-
money in there for, to expend towards healthcare expenses is your opt-out portion. So prior to us exceeding that amount, we could bring it back should you choose to opt into the healthcare.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm gonna do at this point.
Right, so there, there's the 3,600 or whatever you get for opting out, so there's some money available within a budgeted line item, so should
Well-
you choose to take it, we can make the amendment later.
And truly, I think, as I see it, the line item right now is 66,000.
Right.
I could go so far as to say that if that provided health care for 4 families instead of 3, that's still 3/4 of what's
Right, yeah,
necessary,
we
which
got-
means
we're
it would
good.
give us
We
9 months
do
to make a
budget
decision.
amendments throughout the year
Yeah,
anyways, so
sure.
I just,
Yep,
and I honestly don't know what I'm gonna do at this point.
okay. All right, any other discussion?
So before so there's a motion to adopt, right?
That would be, yep,
And then there's the only point I would like to make for residents' knowledge is that I'd like to just reiterate that we did have a workshop, so there has been considerable discussion about this. I just don't want anyone to think that we're passing this without having gone through it in detail.
A rather long workshop.
And we spent
Yeah.
5 hours working on it a couple of weeks back, so as long as our residents are aware that there was considerable time spent reviewing the budget.
absolutely. And it's worth noting that in the general fund, in the fire, and in the police, there are all surpluses anticipated at this point. Anywhere from, I guess, about 1% in the police which is pretty much an exchange account, to about 5%, a little over 5 in the fire, and about 3% surplus in the general fund.
The way we adopt the budget, just so board members, is one of the comments from the auditors, and is that we are adopting this on a fund level. So it's each, each individual department is as proposed here tonight. So, the township board is the 43,510 within the general fund. So it's specific to those department levels.
Not the individual line items.
Not the individual line, it's the general fund, and then, as they're proposed there, so.
Okay. Any other discussion, or is there a motion?
Make a motion to adopt the fiscal year budget 2017.
I just offer, to say that we're setting the elected and appointed officials' compensation with the established millage rate for fiscal year 2017 at 8.4929 mils as presented. So that the board is taking action to set the millage rate.
Okay.
So that's
So
that
moved.
correction, yeah.
All right.
Moved with the correction.
Did I hear support from Mr. Badkins? Okay. All right. I have to write be bit and be bat. Discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Mr. Batanti?
Yes.
Mr. Batkins?
Yes.
Mr. Servil?
Yes.
Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. York?
Yes.
Mr. Witt? Yes. Mr. Verkust?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you, Board. Next on the agenda, item C, renewal of the contract with Kirk, Huth, Lang, and Badalamenti as general counsel for 4 years at an annual retainer rate of $80,000 and an hourly rate of $110 for additional work. Board members, we've received actually two things. We received the initial proposal that was in your board packet. Within that, it was outlined that the rate was originally $80,000 back in 2006. In past years, when times were tough, Mr. Huth came in and offered a reduction in that rate from 80 to 72,000. So the '06 level was 80,000. In 2012, the proposal was to reduce that to 72,000. So in essence, the one proposal before us is to return to the $80,000 annual retainer rate. I'm certainly comfortable saying that I've been as comfortable as I could possibly be with the service that I get from Mr. Huth and his firm. So I have no reason to do anything but approve this, and I think it's a reasonable request on his part to return back to the rate that we were back in '06 through 11. There's another proposal from his firm regarding the legal services related to labor law, and I really believe they should probably be addressed separately. So, I know the item that was on our agenda was a renewal of that contract for $80,000 as a retainer rate and an hourly rate of $110 for any additional work. So, I don't know if the board
We'll
has.
talk about it now. Just add it to the
Well,
motion.
Well, just,
Yeah.
Let's
do them
Yeah, I
separate.
think
Let's
it's
do
two
them
separate things. I really think it is.
I'll make a motion to approve to renew the contract with Kirk, Huth, Lang, and Badalamenti PLC as general counsel for 4 years at an annual retainer rate of $80,000 and an hourly rate of $110 for additional work.
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Tominello.
And I think it's also important to note that the contract, it's a 30-day,
Right, I was gonna say.
it's a 4-year agreement that you're agreeing to hold your rate constant, but we have a 30-day option if the board says.
Terminate us,
Yeah,
right. We don't, yeah, we're not interested in serving if you don't want us to serve, so.
Right.
And,
That's right.
and make no mistake, we don't want to terminate you. So,
Thank you. I
yeah.
appreciate that.
You said you could terminate us, we don't want to do that. We might terminate the contract, but I doubt that too.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I missed it, thanks.
Discussion?
I just wanted to point out one thing. I have no problem with the raise, the $10 an hour raise, because it's probably long overdue, but I just wanted to point out that there is a raise. And the 80,000 is just a return to something that was going on years ago, so I have no problem with that.
All right,
I would say that I've had reason to contact Mr. Huth on multiple occasions to help clarify things, and he's always done a great job of being timely and responsive, and I am pleased with what I've seen the work to be so far in my time on the board.
Likewise.
I would echo that.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, we've got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Tominello to renew the contract with Kirk Huth Lang and Badalamenti as general counsel for 4 years at an annual retainer rate of $80,000 and an hourly rate of $110 for additional work. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next item before us, and I did, it was in the original proposal, the subject, I guess I should say, of Mr. Huth's firm pursuing the legal services was proposed for Labor Council, saying that they do offer that to, I think it was 30 other municipalities or municipal. So, kind of led to a further discussion about the subject and whether or not there'd be some value or interest in that. And I did forward to the board members an email with some comments. I really believe that we have potentially two options before us regarding labor work. One, I guess, really three options. One is to do nothing. We currently do not have a retainer or a contractual relationship with our current labor council. We've had them as labor council for probably since 2010, I believe. I went back and took a look. And I can't say that they've served us poorly. But part of the reason why we went with that firm was specifically one individual who was an expert in a very specific area of labor law, and I think he served us well. He's reached the point, though, in his career where he has retired. That the firm has given us, in addition to that individual, 3 other individuals that have handled our labor matters at any given time. 2 of them have left that firm. But can't say I have any complaints about any of the individuals that we worked with. The rate is $170 per hour. The proposal from Mr. Huth's firm would be $140 an hour for labor council. So one option before us would be to consider moving from establishing, in essence, a relationship with Mr. Huth's firm for labor council. I do know Mr. Lang, his partner and associate, pretty well-respected guy. I know that he's given courses at MTA, and I'm sure Mr. Huth could speak to that a little bit more. But one option before us is to consider that, to say, well, maybe we'd send things that way. And another option would be to look at the potential or possibility of actually having a retainer for our labor law, and potentially saving the, kind of onesie-twosie process of billing and keeping track of a half-hour phone call here and there. I also think one of the advantages, why I talked to Mr. Huth about this a little further, and one of the things that I think could pay some dividends is, currently as it stands, every time I have a labor question and I pick up the phone, I kind of know that I'm writing a check via telephone, and it seems like those calls have a real funny way of ending on 15, 30, 45-minute increments. And, but that's the nature of the business. That's their relationship. They don't have a retainer, so that's how they make their money. But because of that, sometimes I find myself a little hesitant saying, well, do I really want to write a check right now for, $85 to call and ask this question when I think I know what the answer is? And sometimes that's a little disconcerting, but that's the way the business works. The other thing that happens is I'm certain there are times that I've wanted to have labor council here at the meeting. But I know that as soon as I ask that question, I know for sure I'm writing a check, and the fellow's gonna say, well, what time can I get there? Oh, I don't want him to get here late. I wanna make sure you're here for the agenda item. So in essence, we are collectively writing a check to have that opinion. While Mr. Huth may not be the specialist in labor law within his firm. If there's a subject we're gonna talk about, he has the potential to be briefed or to have a conversation. If there's a question we have, he has that opportunity to be that liaison. And at times in the past, when I've had to say to Mr. Huth, could you contact Mr. So-and-so at the other law firm, or vice versa, to fill him in on the details, you know, we avoid that charge when Mr. Huth walks back to his firm and says, hey, you know, this is what's going on, and they have a chance to kind of work together. So I do believe Mr. Huth's firm has served us well, and I believe there's an opportunity for us in establishing a relationship with him to very likely save money, and I have no doubt that it would be a good level of service. That's one issue. The second issue is whether or not we should look at the concept of a retainer, or whether we should just look at an hourly process. But I, having dealt with the attorneys or in all the different firms, probably the most out of anyone on this board, I would recommend that we do switch to Mr. Huth's firm for our labor law services. And I don't know that a motion is necessarily in order to make that switch, because we don't have a commitment to either firm. But I certainly wouldn't want to get into a position where, as opposed to calling Keller Toma for labor law, I'm calling Mr. Huth's firm, and the board says, hey, wait a minute, why are we getting a bill from Mr. Huth's firm? So maybe a motion is in order, and if so, then we should also consider the idea, and I don't know what the board's opinion is on the concept of a retainer.
Well, my opinion, I'd need to know some numbers first. How much money? Comes out around 70 hours. $12,000 would be about 70 hours at 170. At 140, it would be probably closer to 80 hours. I forgot, I figured 170.
Yeah.
But you got any idea how many hours were billed last year?
Well, what
More than that.
I did do,
Right.
so two things. I did, in that email that I sent to each of you, I did outline those costs, and I could pull them up here, but the numbers were substantially higher than 12,000. Having said that, for example, in one year, I think in 2014, you know, it was a six-figure number, but that involved a rather lengthy and detailed Act 312 arbitration case with the firefighters union, so, you know, that wouldn't have been covered in this either.
Right, but it seemed to me that the numbers you provided, we were at or near $12,000 as it was anyway. or
In
more.
general and in fire.
Right, so,
When we had originally, the supervisor and I had talked about this, I was the one that said maybe a retainer makes sense, because there are times where we say, well, that's an issue that's sitting there, but we'll wait until we get another issue. So when we get them on the phone, we're getting 3 questions answered at the same time, because we want to try and save, if we're talking to them for 15 minutes, we want to use all 15 minutes up.
Right.
I like
so-
the idea of Mr. Kirk being here and having his firm cover that. I would suggest that we.
What about Mr. Huth?
I'm sorry.
No respect.
Excuse me. But the
They're all
only
nice
thing
people.
I would wonder is if we could literally have a separate contract for that. In other words, let's say, for example, we decided at some point that we wanted to go in a different direction. We wouldn't have to disturb the other relationship with Mr. Huth's firm.
I think that's
So,
the intent. Is
Yeah,
for
oh
them
yeah,
to-
absolutely,
two
no
separate-
question, that's
a
why I
separate-
asked for 2 separate motions.
A separate contract also with a 30-day
Yeah. no
clause.
problem.
And I would be comfortable with a retainer.
So to the hours point, what I did was I took, in essence, I took the $12,000, I pulled out at $140 per hour, that's about 85 hours. And if I back that out across 12 months, that's about 7 hours a month. And let me just say that it's difficult for Mr. Huth to anticipate what those hours may entail. I certainly don't spend 7 hours a month on the phone, but I know that sometimes when we ask a question, especially from my experience, and Mr. Huth, you might be able to expound on that, we tend to see that when I ask a question regarding labor law, there's a lot of federal legislation, statewide legislation, and it results in research, kind of case law and different things like that. It seems to come into play a little bit more, and I don't know if that's a bigger part of labor law.
I will say that there's some efficiencies by having us do both, and just by what your question is today, I can give you an example. Mrs. Lucido asked me today when I was in the township whether there could be a change on the vision requirements for firefighters and what that change could be. Well, the fact is that the U.S. Supreme Court's ruled on that already. You know, I called Craig, I walked back to the office, told Craig Lane, we got an issue in Harrison. We may be doing our labor law, let's try and get this one right. And he said, oh, you know, bingo, the Supreme Court's ruled on this already. When you see Marge, tell her this. So, there is a lot of commingling of the kind of the legal services between the two. And, the reason why I think it saves you money is because that type of issue, I'm not gonna have to write down my time, send it to someone to type up a bill, send it to you, keep track of it. It's just gonna be part of the retainer. So if I'm not paying somebody, you don't have to pay us, and I think there's gonna be some efficiencies.
Right. So, and I agree, so let me say, I think I've been definitely clear in saying that I think it's wise for us to establish that labor law relationship with Mr. Huth's firm. That's number one. I also believe, as Mr. Huth says, that this process of kind of, you know, keeping track of time in 15-minute portions, that's the way it works. That's how it works. I mean, I'm sure, you know, you have to do that in other cases and sometimes with us. But it does become somewhat tedious. So I'm all for the retainer. The only issue that I have, and in all fairness to Mr. Huth, I suppose the only issue he has is what's the appropriate number? And the only thing that I can say is we did kind of negotiate back and forth. You know, I think with the relationship we have, I mean, let's just say this. If I look at the amount of time or hours, I guess, invoiceable, flat-out dollars that Mr. Huth's firm gave up in 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, or, you know, across a 4 or 5 year, and an $8,000 cut. I mean, how off can we be on a $12,000 retainer? I think we'd want to, if we did this, we'd want to examine it after a year's time and say, hey, you know what? One side or the other lost, we could fix it, but I think it's a reasonable attempt to estimate that number, and I think in the end, it you know, we have no reason to believe that our relationship with his firm has been anything other than good for the township and a good working relationship. So, you know,
So my thought is anytime you can streamline operations or services, it's a win-win for, you know, for both parties. So I think it's a good thing. Are you looking for a motion, Mr. Supervisor? If so, I can make a motion to, ask the supervisor to continue negotiations with, Kirk, Huth, Lang, and Badalamenti on a, on a,
I don't think there's
Labor-
negotiations, there's.
Yeah, it's
okay,
a
well, then
yeah.
the contract, labor and employment, contract, and that would be a, the monthly flat fee of $1,000 per month.
Support.
all right, motion by Mr. Tominello, with support by Mr. York. And there would be ultimately a need similar to this other agreement if we had a retainer relationship to execute a contract, but I would anticipate that the terms would generally be rather parallel, like with the exception that the hourly rate is $140
Right.
and the monthly rate in the retainer is $1,000, correct?
Right, in a 30-day out, right.
30-day out.
Yeah,
Yep.
you got it.
Yep, so I think I would just end up ultimately executing the contract with the terms that
Yeah.
the board discusses here.
Just one question about that. We had, the contract on the general services was for 3 years?
4.
4 years. So you had mentioned, Mr. Supervisor, that we wanted to take a year to analyze, you know, so do we want to, the only thing I would like to clarify is that if we're going to analyze it after a year to see it, if one party's been disadvantaged, do we somehow incorporate that and make sure it's not a point of contention after a year?
Only if we come out ahead, then we should not address it. No, I think that's reasonable, so maybe is it appropriate to say that it's a 1-year term at this point? Because it would force us and Mr. Huth to come back before the board and say, hey, you know, we took a look back and this is where we think we are.
I just don't want there to be any, you know, misunderstanding.
No, that's an excellent
That's
point.
a reasonable request,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's reasonable.
So,
You know, it's like an insurance policy, right? We don't know if next month we're gonna have 10 labor items, or 3, or maybe none. It's just a crapshoot,
Yep.
to be honest with you.
Yep.
You never really know. But I will say this, I don't know if any of the members on the board were here when we had, was it Bodman Group? I don't know if you guys were here at that point, but we did have a retainer with Bodman Group. They had a thing where we paid, I can't remember how much it was, but we could just call, get our questions answered. It was sort of nice. Like Ken says, you're afraid to call because you know you're gonna get a bill, you know, and you don't wanna be wrong, you wanna call. right? So you're not wrong, and sometimes, you know, what seems common sense, there's 20 laws against, you know, what you can do sometimes in government.
Yeah.
Sometimes government law, is not the same as business law.
Well, that's why I think it'll be beneficial to have a municipal, you know, a firm that really specializes in municipal work interfacing with our labor attorney, because there's sometimes where our labor attorney has to, like, what's the Township Act? And that's just because it's out of their wheelhouse, but that's something that their firm works within, so.
My question would be, being a new member here, what's provided and what isn't provided under that contract?
Yep, good question. So the proposal includes, the flat fee or that retainer fee would be, you know, quote unquote unlimited advice, not a, you know, we're not, it's by, not by the hour, but it would be contract administration, advising the township in the following areas: discipline, discharge, management rights, subcontracting, past practices, preventive counseling, including harassment in the workplace, wage and hour compliance, disability, family leave issues, drug and alcohol issues, employment laws, and civil rights. And the big ticket items, I think that what I would consider historically big ticket items that would not be covered would be negotiations, so contract negotiations, because that can be very simple or it can be lengthy. Litigation, in case of, say, a township employee suing township, and then arbitration. So if there's a decision made that there's a grievance, the employee says, well, I think the township should do X, we say, nope, we deny that. There's a grievance process in the you know, collective bargaining agreement, and it leads ultimately to an arbitrator. So we have oftentimes we sit at this table and have a mini court session, and the arbitrator listens in, one side presents their facts and arguments, the other side presents theirs. We leave, briefs are prepared, they're given to the arbitrator, he or she reads them and gives an opinion. That process of hearing and drafting a brief could be anywhere from, I would say at the low end, 2,000 to, I mean, I don't wanna say the high end, it could be anything, but I would say 5,000 would be a pretty high end on an arbitration case.
Then in a contract, if I understand, the three items you mentioned would be excluded, and the retainer would be $1,000 a month, and any non-covered items would be $140 per hour.
Correct. So if Mr. Huth were to provide an attorney for an arbitration hearing, he'd be billing us at $140. We have, since 2010, been paying $170 for that, although sometimes when someone does research, they might bill at a lower rate. So we don't, every hour that our other firm bills us isn't at $170, but the attorney work is at $170. So. All right. Further discussion?
Nope.
Hearing none, we have a motion by Mr. Tominello, a support by Mr. York, to direct the supervisor to enter into a contractual one-year agreement with Kirk Huth Lang and Badalamenti to provide labor law services under a $1,000 per month retainer fee with any additional costs for negotiations, litigation, or arbitration services to be billed at an hourly rate of $140.
Thank you.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. All right,
Like
next,
being the first for you, it's nice.
yeah. All right, next on our agenda, item D1, board members, the resignation from the Planning Commission of Mr. Doug McDougal has created a vacancy. Mrs. Amanda Oparka has applied for appointment to the Planning Commission. Mrs. Oparka serves on our Environmental Committee and on the DDA Board, where she has been instrumental in securing funds for planning. She was the person who drafted the grant application for the coastal zone management rezoning or zoning overlay. She's also our secretary on the DDA Board. She has a degree in hydrogeology, and she's currently completing her master's degree in urban planning. It would be my recommendation to appoint Mrs. Amanda Oparka to the Planning Commission with a term to expire December 20th, 2019.
So moved.
Is there support? Support. Okay, motion by Mr. Tominello, support by Mr. Badkins. Discussion, board. Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Board. Next is item D2.
No.
The Planning Commission terms of Mr. Mark Baccia, Mr. Michael Blum, and Mr. Doug McDougal are scheduled to expire December 20th of this year. Mr. McDougal has asked not to be reappointed, but Mr. Baccia and Mr. Blum have asked to be reappointed, and they have proved to be valuable members of the Planning Commission, and the township has benefited from their insight, knowledge, and expertise. It would be my recommendation to reappoint Mr. Mark Baccia, Mr. Michael Blum to the Planning Commission with terms to expire December 2019.
So moved.
Support. All right, motion by Mr. Tominello, support by Mr. Badkins. Discussion, board members. Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. We've decided to remove item D3. Next on the agenda then would be item D4.
Mr. Supervisor, could you separate that into two motions? There's two appointments there. Can you treat them separately?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. There are two terms on the Zoning Board of Appeals which expire on 12/20 of 16. Mr. Mark Baccia has asked to be reappointed. He has historically served as the liaison between planning and zoning. And, of course, we just made a motion to appoint him to the Planning Commission. In addition, Mr. Brado has applied for the other vacancy on the zoning board. He's served the township for several years, and he's demonstrated a genuine care for our community. As the board packet indicates, it would be my recommendation to reappoint Mr. Mark Baccia to the Zoning Board of Appeals and to appoint Mr. David Brado to the Zoning Board of
I
Appeals.
asked for them to be separated.
I understand that.
okay.
The motion would be separate, but
Well,
I,
the motion's whatever the board
Oh,
decides to
okay.
make.
right, I
All
don't
right.
have a problem if someone wants to separate the motion, but it is
Fine.
a matter of fact that I believe that my recommendation is to appoint one and reappoint the other. So I'm just
Okay.
reading that for the public's knowledge. So,
All right.
having said that, I'll open this up, or I ask
I would
for
make a
board
motion
comment.
to reappoint Mark Baccia to the zoning board of appeals.
Support.
All right, with a term to expire December 2019.
Correct.
Yep, all right, and Mr. Servial, and support by Mr. York. Discussion. Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed,
Mr.
motion
Botch's
carried.
been on both of those for a long time.
I make a motion to appoint Mr. David Brado to the zoning board of appeals with a term to expire December 20th, 2019.
Motion by Mr. Witt, is there support?
Can we just talk Support. about this for just one moment?
Yeah, it's been moved and supported, we always have discussion whether
I
we
mean,
do that
normally
or
we
not.
have discussion before somebody jumps in. I've been told many times that we need to have discussion before a motion. But
Actually,
that's
Robert's
okay.
rule says you shouldn't have discussion until you have a motion, but we're usually pretty casual about it, so.
So,
Well, that's a reason I asked for them to be separated. As you know, I served with Dean Smith, and I had occasion to talk to him because he was supposed to be at my house yesterday for a party, and he wasn't aware of the fact that his term was expiring, and therefore he didn't put in a request for reappointment. But he did do that today.
I saw that.
And I would feel that it's more appropriate, you just did this with two members of the planning commission to reappoint them because they served admirably. He has also, and I think he should have first crack at this. So therefore, that's why I separated them,
Okay.
so.
I mean, I concur. I get that why we're gonna appoint Dave. I understand that. I get it. But Mr. Smith nobody even contacted Mr. Smith to even say that his appointment was up. And I know that, I don't know if it's the clerk's office, supervisor's office, but I know other members, when their appointments come up, they get called. And maybe it's just an oversight, maybe it's just, hopefully Mr. Smith won't say anything. But I have to, concur. Mr. Smith has done a good job on the ZBA. I come to most of the meetings. I'm here, setting up the video and taping it. I don't know why we're not gonna reappoint Mr. Smith.
you know. I
Well,
don't-
let's
I
assume
don't
that
necessarily
Mr.,
know him
let's
personally.
assume that Mr. Verkest didn't know that, Dean Smith wanted to be reappointed, now he does. So with that, I would make a motion to,
You can't.
We've
There's
got a
already a
motion.
motion for Mr. Brado.
it wasn't seconded.
Yes, it
Yes.
was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Tominello did. You know, so, I mean, I guess I'm just disappointed, I'm extremely disappointed, in this, that, Mr. Smith is not being reappointed. You just said in the previous, planning commission, you know, like I said with Mr. Tominello at the last meeting, you know, you wanna keep the people that have experience on these boards. You potentially have, you know, 1, 2, 3 board members, well, 2 new ones and somebody relatively new to the board in Mr. Batante. That's a lot of experience that is gone. And I will also say that when we picked the people on these boards, we did them with, a look to like Mr. Baccia, I believe he's an architect engineer. Mr. Lytle, he's an attorney. We
And-
did
and
it-
a professional engineer.
And Mr. Servial, he was originally put on there because he was a builder. For example, that everybody brought a little piece of something to that board when you're talking, you know, zoning issues and that type of stuff. And to not reappoint Mr. Smith, and I didn't bring Mr. Smith forward, I didn't even meet him until he was on the ZBA, to be quite honest with you. I don't know if you originally appointed him or Mr. Forlini, I can't remember. But, you know, I think Mr. Smith has served admirably on that board, and this is,
I would add that I didn't know Mr. Smith before I started serving on zoning board of appeals with him either. But he is from a part of the township that I think is, good. He lives out on the water in an expensive home. And, I think he's fair because he lives in an expensive home. He's going to try to protect his interests, but at the same time, he's always been fair with the petitioners.
Well, I myself do not know Mr. Smith, and, Mr. Supervisor, you stated that he had filled out a application for appointment?
I received an emailed application this morning, slightly before 8 AM, I think.
Mr. Smith didn't know that his
Yeah,
term had
yeah,
expired. I
understood,
mean,
understood.
you know, nobody asked him.
All right. Further discussion, or could we open up the floor for public comment? All right.
William Bardell, 37865 Point Rosa, 20-year resident. Now, I'm the new kid on the block, and Mr. Verkest, I hear you talking a lot about relationships. Well, Dean Smith, if you want to talk about relationships, has been on this board, and I don't know why on God's green earth you wouldn't want the gentleman back on the board. Let him have first crack at it. And then if he doesn't want it, then you can have Mr. Servio mentor Mr. Brado on the board. I don't see that it's that difficult to give Mr. Dean Smith the first crack at it. And then, like I said, if he doesn't want the position, Bill Servio can mentor the other gentleman, Mr. Brado. It's not, you know, we talk a lot about relationships, and I'd like to see some relationships. So that's my point. I mean, just fair, you know? So why don't we be fair about it and get with Dean Smith and work on these relationships that you talk so much about. Thank you.
Thank
Hear a
you.
lot about it. I want to see a little bit.
Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment, move back to board comment.
Just one other thing, I read when I got the email that he couldn't attend for a medical thing. And I talked to him yesterday, as I said, he was supposed to be at my house, invited for a party. He's got bronchial pneumonia, otherwise he would have been here to plead his own case.
I saw that as well, right? I think, but if I'm not mistaken, I think he sent it to each board member.
Well, he didn't state what he had, though. He's got pretty serious illness.
Okay.
He ended up going to the hospital and having tests done.
Yeah, he did, I wasn't aware of that.
Mr. Supervisor, I served with Mr. Smith. He's done a good job. Had his name been brought forward, I would have supported him. I've served with Mr. Brado, as most of us have, and he's done a good job. And I think that, given the fact that his name is being brought forward, he's being brought forward, I would support him.
Mr. Batati, did I just hear you say that if Mr. Smith's name was brought forward, you would support him? It is brought forward.
Not in the motion, it isn't.
That's not a motion, it's a recommendation
Well,
from
the
the
motion,
supervisor.
the motion's been made
Okay,
and seconded.
all right.
That's what I said.
I think this is dirty pool played on Mr. Smith, I can tell you that right now.
You know what, I mean, that's quite the aspersion, but nobody has a right to any of these seats, the
I
same
didn't
that
say
none
there
of us.
was a
Hold on,
right at him, what
hold
I
on.
said was,
Hold on,
that
let
on
me-
every one of
that-
these cases, you say that you call people, that you ask them if they wanna serve, and that's clearly reflected in all of the documents and every reappointment we've ever done. And in this case, Mr. Smith was not even contacted, that his thing was,
I think your interruption's done is what that means.
was expired, and, you know, you wanna play the dirty pool, go ahead, that's fine. But I don't think that you should be treating people that have served, you know, at least give them a chance, or at least have the common decency to call them and tell them you're not gonna reappoint them. How about that?
Being the new guy in the block, can I ask what the process is for appointments as far as expiring? Do we have a standard?
Nope,
Is there a
it-
notification? Is that something as being appointed, you need to track and monitor yourself? What is that?
Nope, that's a great
process?
question. So let me address that. First and foremost, the process of appointments to some boards, in this case, the zoning board of appeals, is strictly up to the board of trustees. So the board of trustees appoints members to the zoning board of appeals. Appointment to the zoning board of appeals doesn't automatically come with an automatic reappointment. I think it would be a misstatement on Mr. York's part to say that every time someone's been appointed to a board, they're always called and they're always asked to reappoint or asked if they wish to serve. I would say that happens in some cases, but I wouldn't say that happens in every case. In some cases, people come forward. In my 6 years on the board as supervisor, in some cases, people have come to me and said, you know, I'm not sure that I'd like to serve, or I wish to resign. In some cases, in the case of Mr. McDougal, he said, you know, just based on other factors in my life and my history, he served on planning commission for many years, he said, I do not wish to be reappointed. Sometimes people call and they'll say, I wish to be reappointed, and sometimes they don't. So there's no procedure, but what's important is relative to, I guess, for lack of a better word, the law or the act, the Planning and Zoning Enabling Act or the Charter Township Act, whichever might prevail here. Ultimately, this board has the right to name someone, say, I make a motion to appoint Mr. Jones, I second that, the board discusses it, and they appoint that, so.
So that
And
being
I
said-
should say, some come with a recommendation from the supervisor. I don't know if that's true in the zoning board or not, so I don't believe it is.
So in this case, the planning commission is the only committee that the name has to come from the supervisor's office. The ZBA or any other committee, any board member can say, I want Mr. Jones, whatever, Stewart, whatever, and bring that name forward. Only the planning commission that comes from the recommendation from the supervisor's office.
Okay.
So, because it's Mr. Brado, anybody can say, you know, whatever name that they would like to appoint, any board member can do that.
Further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Tominello to appoint Mr. David Brado to the Zoning Board of Appeals with a term to expire December 20th, 2019. All those in favor?
Roll
say-
call, please.
Okay, what I would ask is if you know you want a roll call, you know, let me know to the extent you can, because I'm, as a chair, I try to,
Well, you didn't take a breath.
I definitely paused because I expected Mr. York to say it, but just in courtesy, if you can, just something to keep in
How about
mind.
that? I didn't though.
I was rather surprised. I waited as long as I thought I could. Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Tominello?
Yes,
Mr. Batkins?
No.
Mr. Batanti?
Yes.
Mr. Servil?
No,
Mr. York?
no,
Mr. Verkest?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Thank you, Board. There is a note here, I think, I don't think this falls on us, but I'm just gonna check. The liaison from planning commission to zoning board is not, I'm questioning, is that a decision that the planning commission makes or that we make? I think by the fact that we've appointed him to both, we've in essence kind of
Yeah.
made
We
it,
made that decision.
It's at the board level, not at the PC level.
that's what I thought. But I'm not sure that we have to actually make a motion to declare him the liaison.
Yeah.
We
it's
did
a-
make that motion. It was
We did?
Planning commission liaison to the zoning
Okay,
board.
I might have missed it. I double checked to make sure.
Yeah, I think that's what I heard.
Okay.
That's what I wrote down.
For clarification, Mr. Supervisor, that is part of the act. You have to, according to the zoning board of appeals act that I gave Mr. Huth today, it does say that the liaison shall be appointed from the planning commission, so, by the board.
Right. And I don't think that was in the motion, I guess is what, and from looking back at the motion as it was made, I'm not certain that we declared him. We just reappointed him. He has been historically, but I wonder if it's,
That was what I wrote down, was as planning commission liaison, just because that was what you
Sure.
stated, he was the planning commission liaison before, and then we were reappointing him to that position. so.
understood. Again, I mean, by virtue of the fact that he's the only individual we've appointed to both boards, it almost seems by default, but I don't remember it as a part of the motion, so I don't know if that's a concern, Mr. Huth, or if it's,
Well, the minutes, of course, will decide the issue, and I think what I'm hearing is that the minutes are gonna be presented next time with
Saying
him as
just
the
that.
liaison.
I'll buy that. Sounds good. The power of the man with the pen.
Is that Mr. Karpowicz in the audience?
No.
Next on our agenda, item D5. Board members, we've received notice from Mr. Gaber that he wishes to continue to serve on the firefighters pension board. Mr. Gaber has been on the board since 2013, and his commitment to the community would continue to be an asset to the firefighters pension board. I would recommend to the board the reappointment of Mr. John Gaber to the firefighters pension board for a 4-year term to expire November 20th, 2020.
So moved.
Support?
Got a motion by Mr. York, with support by Mr. Servial. Discussion, board members. Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, board. Next on the agenda, item E1 regarding the senior center CDBG project. Mr. Witt.
Yes, board. As you know, last meeting I had added this to the agenda and had to pull it off. But I wanted to, with Mr. Newmer here, provide an update as to the progress, both in the construction of the senior center, and I know Mr. Newmer can speak to that a little bit. We had a meeting last week out on site with both the contractor, the architect, Mr. Newmer, and a representative from Macomb County's, I don't know what they call themselves anymore, they keep changing their name, but the entity that oversees community development block grant. So if you want to go through that portion first, Mr. Newman, I think it's important just so the board knows where construction is and where we are in the schedule and stuff.
Okay, I'm glad to do that. Good evening, board members. We did have a construction update meeting last week. Since the project's gotten started, we've had kind of a slow start. The contractor went out to first do the utility locates and they started excavating for foundations. And almost immediately, they discovered that there was a DTE power line that was gonna be in the way. And it's taken them on the order of 6 weeks to get that moved. DTE has to come out and relocate, it's not something the contractor does, so we were kinda at DTE's mercy, as it were. In the meantime, the contractor has kept working on the project so far as we've gotten shop drawings and whatnot submitted to the architect and approved. They've ordered most of the materials and equipment that are needed for the project. And actually, the contractor at the last meeting stated to me that they've got almost all the materials in their shop now and ready to go, even the items that were initially considered to be long lead time items. So now that we've gotten that DTE power line moved, we were able to get the foundations in, and they're starting the stick building now. So that's kind of where we're at. We are looking at, one of the things that we have to be mindful of is expending the block grant monies within a certain time frame. When we met at the last meeting, we had a representative from Macomb County there from the block grant program, and we talked about, having those monies expended by, March of 2017. And, the contractor said that he didn't think that that was gonna be a problem. So although we've gotten kind of a slow start on it, you're gonna see a lot of, structure coming up out of the ground now, and, things will be going along much faster. We did sit down and have, kind of a lengthy discussion with the folks from Macomb County, seeing that this is a, prevailing wages Davis-Bacon, project because of the federal funding. There are a significant number of steps that we have to go through as far as, determining prevailing wages, doing employee interviews. There's a lot of paperwork that has to be filled out and whatnot, so we went through a bunch of that, detail at the last meeting to make sure we had everything in line.
Yeah, and one of the things that had changed from the beginning time that we started this project to now is the federal government issued something called a super circular, which changed the way we have to do recording for Davis-Bacon wages for a project of this size. And it requires an additional, was it the Section 3 reporting?
Yeah.
That adds an additional layer of work for this project as far as reporting that we have to do as to how we're spending these dollars. So that sort of brings us up to where we are as far as construction. The other item I brought here before you is a letter from Wade Trim. And again, this letter is dated October 4th, but the reason we held off is on bringing this to the board is that we were again waiting to speak with the county. We had a meeting that got pushed back a couple times due to an individual leaving from the county and that work being reassigned to a different individual. But because of the project having to be redesigned, because of the way the bids came back, we are short in the money we are allocating towards Wade Trim to cover the project. Wade Trim is requesting an additional authorization of $16,354.44 to cover the additional work. This includes some of the additional reporting that since this original proposal was given to us from Wade Trim back in 2015, some of that additional reporting stuff that's changed in the interim time. So tonight I'd be looking for that approval. That brings the total engineering, design, bidding, construction, monitoring, reporting cost to $41,604.44. And that money would come essentially from the general fund.
And coming from the general fund is driven by the fact that the total cost of the project exceeds the CDBG
Correct.
funding.
So, may I ask a question? The additional funding is for additional, did you say additional engineering and additional reporting on the Davis
Yeah, it's a
Bacon?
Davis-Bacon.
Yeah, it's a combination of both the need to have bid it out an additional 2 times, because the first time we bid it out, the project came in way over our budget. The board decided to change the scope of the project, and then it had to be bid out an additional time, because one of the contractors had a deficiency in their bid due to a typographic error essentially. But to meet the standards of purchasing that we have to follow for the block grant program, we had to bid it out again, and guess what? We only had the same bidder bid it out again, so it was one of those kind of things. And then a portion of it is for additional Davis-Bacon reporting that has changed, as far as what the scope of work was in 2015 when we got the original pricing from Mr. Newmark to today.
So was the original bid based on an hourly rate or just a flat rate of $25,250, I think I see there? I guess my question would be, how did they arrive at the extra $15,000 or $16,000?
Mr. Newmark could probably speak to the math more clearly.
The original price that we gave to the township board was a lump sum cost to design, bid, and do construction administration for the project. As we go through the project, we keep track internally, obviously, of how funds are being spent and where we're at. And, the $16,000 is basically, what we spent to date, and then allowing for, the construction administration budget of, $7,250 that we need in order to finish the project out. That's the construction portion of the budget.
I guess the reason I asked the question, In the past, if memory serves me correctly, when you've had overruns, they've been at a per hour rate. That's $80 sticks in my head for some reason. I don't know if that's a true number or not, but, you know, I personally would like to see some justification for a 60% overrun.
Well,
I mean, the justification is, I mean, we can, you can break it down on a what it costs per basis. We usually don't do that on a lump sum bid. But the justification is we had to bid the project out twice, and then they changed the rules that require additional reporting.
And the design was modified
Right, the
also.
design was changed.
Well, I'm not saying it's wrong, I just, what I'm saying, and what I heard from Mr. Newmer was that they looked at their costs so far, and quite frankly, their costs so far could be maybe underbid at to start with, and he's trying to pick that part up. What I'm looking at is the additional work, is it worth $16,000, that's all.
I can address that, board members. The design costs and bidding through, the first bid package was, $18,765.27. We had originally bid that work at $18,000. So there is an overage there of $765.27, is the difference. Of what we thought that work was gonna cost us versus what it actually cost us to bid the project the first time. And then the remainder of the cost that you see there is the actual cost of what it took to bid the project the next two times.
Well, and, I mean, really, the 16,000 is, I mean, the bulk of that is the architect essentially redesigning the entire plan and rebidding it out because of that change in scope.
Yeah, although this is a wait term contract, that the architect is a sub-consultant to us, and they're doing 85% of the work.
And I know Mr. Newmer and I had spoke about this several times, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Wade Trim was, you lowered the markup that you would normally charge on a contractor?
Yeah, actually, we're passing these funds through, typically when we have a sub-consultant working on a project, there's a 15% markup that goes to cover, professional liability insurance and administration of their work and things like that. We're actually passing these costs through to the township with, no markup at all. It's direct cost from the architect.
So maybe I misunderstood, because I had thought that there was a mention of 16,000 for added reporting, but now I'm reading this closer and it says to cover the costs for, it includes changes to the design as well. I mean, so I guess I understand. It sounded like $16,000 for reporting, that's what I'd originally
No, and I'm
heard.
sorry, it's to cover both costs, the additional design work and then the additional reporting. So there's two items that make up that $16,000 cost.
I guess where I'm coming from as a retired builder, if I have a contract with a client, and then there is a change in the scope of the work, there's a change work order written, and both parties have to agree to that. This is quite a bit of difference, and I understand most of the reason. I understand this was a mess to start with. And, you know, if we go back 3 years, the project would have been half the price. But that said, we are where we are. I just asking for, maybe in the future, maybe we could track this a little bit better than this time.
Yeah, and if you ever, I mean, like, if you would've called, we get detailed billings from Mr. Newmer's firm, even though even on a project where he bids it on a lump sum cost, we do get billings throughout the course of the project that lay out what scope of work has been done.
Didn't you just hand this out this evening?
No, I know, but I'm just saying, in the future, if you see something where you're like, oh, I want backup, we get bills that break down some of Mr. Newmer's work, so if we get to that road.
I'm not trying to put Mr.
No,
Newmer on the spot here, but you just,
Yeah,
the
no,
first
no,
time
I
I
get
saw this was at 6:30.
Right, and I got it this afternoon again,
And that's fine, so I'm asking the questions.
Yeah.
I'd ask the questions in advance if I had the thing in advance, but.
Yep. Oh, no, I'm just saying, we do get that breakdown, and we can always share that.
Well, the confusion is that what was presented and what was said later are two different things.
Well, do we need, let me ask this question then. I mean, is there a desire from the board for greater detail? And would there be any delay in the program if we waited for that detail and looked at this at our next meeting? I'm just asking the question.
I don't think that it would necessarily delay the project. I think we still have a couple dollars within our authorized amount for the project. But here's the thing, is I don't think Mr. Newmer is gonna come back with a sheet that says, you know, this is gonna cost me 5 hours and it's this amount, and this is gonna cost me 6 hours and this amount, and I'm gonna be in a position to say, I think that amount should be 4.5 hours, not 5.
I guess it's not.
You're not a good enough professional engineer. That's my problem. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I can give it to you and Dave can prepare it. That's no problem. But I don't know what it's gonna change.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a matter as much, and if other board members disagree, I'm fine with that. It's a matter as much of reducing the cost as understanding it better, possibly.
That was my point.
Me.
I'm not
You
accusing
know.
Mr. Numero of overcharging us necessarily, but I hear architect fees. I'm not even sure if this architect is in-house or if it's a third party that they subcontract with.
Well, you just said it's a subcontractor that.
Okay, well, he has a bill from that, and if he marks it up 15%, we can see that bill.
He just
That
said
would-
he doesn't mark it up at all. He chose, Wade Trim has chosen not to mark up that bill to keep our costs down.
Okay.
I do have a question. As I'm reading this, first assumption, first correction, the original proposal was for a total of $25,250, which was divided into $18,000 for design and bidding, $7,250 for construction phase services, correct?
Yes.
And the 18,000 was a lump sum. So, and I just wanna make sure that I understand, that lump sum means you'll provide that work for not approximately this much, you'll provide that work for that much.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I have no reservation that as you're coming back to us, that, you know, we were involved in the process. Having seen the plans and having attended some of the meetings, I know that we went back and forth to try to adjust this cost. But at the top of page 2, if I read the design and bidding costs through the first bid opening was $18,765.27, which matches closely with the original budget of $18,000. I don't read that as I owe you $765, with all due respect. I read that as you guys were really close, but the additional work is $15,552.81. So the request to me would seemingly be $15,552.81, not and another $765 because our lump sum was off. And I don't mean that in any level of disrespect, but as I read it, I think if Mr. Huth came to me and said, hey, I'll do the retainer for $1,000 a month, and 1 month we really clobbered him, I don't think he gets to come back and say, yeah, you know, I need $1,500. Well, you said you'd do it for $1,000. You hope that maybe on the next one you make it up. I don't mean that in any disrespectful way or in anything. I just see this, that if additional work that I asked for, that we requested as a board, through a various number of things, whether it be changes to the federal law, you know, the need to rebid this, you know, I'm frustrated about the fact that the guy came in at $255 and the county says, nope, you can't accept that. Well, holy smokes, they came back at $277. Well, you can accept that bid. This whole process is ridiculous. All I'm saying is if all I asked for in additional work was $15,552, I don't think the request should be for $16,354. I think it should be for $15,552, if I'm reading it properly, and I may misunderstand that, but that's what I see before me. And
Yep, I just have a comment on that. You're correct. I mean, the original design fee, the cost for that work was $18,000. There were a lot of points during that discussion where we added a lot of different work to that project, and the scope did increase as we went through that. You know, and to be quite honest, I'm not gonna sit here and say, well, you know, everything changed, I need another $700. If the board wants to, consider $552, that's fine. Quite frankly, as, Mr. Wood pointed out, you know, the other $765, that's probably gonna get applied towards, all this extra reporting and whatnot that we have to do for the county, but, quite frankly, if we come up within $765 of getting everything correct, I'll be
That's
happy
pretty good.
with that.
further discussion, board? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the additional work at a cost of $15,550.81.
All right, motion by Mr. Witt, is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Tominello. We've had a fair amount of discussion, board, is there additional, or if it's okay, I'll open up the floor for public comment.
William Bardell, 20-year resident, New Breed, 31-year skilled union tradesman. This cost overrun thing is a fallacy. when this was bid, it was said there was enough fat on the job that it would cover any of this to get in compliance with. This is what happens when you get one company that is the general. When you award a contract to one contractor and it doesn't go out for bids. You gave it to Weight Trim. They said there was enough fat in the contract to cover this thing, and now you're blaming it on compliance. That's malarkey. Blame it on the unions, blame it on compliance, that's malarkey. Most union jobs get done under budget, on time, and they get a big bonus at the end. So, my head's gonna explode. No, don't do it. There's enough fat in the job to complete the job on what you said you were gonna do it for. That's why I keep yelling and screaming about stop the no bid nonsense. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment. Move back to board comment.
I guess it just seems to me, Mr. Supervisor, Mr. Witt, that I understand that we reworked the project. I get it, and there's additional reporting, but it's doubling the cost of the design work.
No.
It's not?
The original, I mean,
Was
the
18,000
design work, yeah, but the total allocation was 25,000.
250.
So the total allocation's going up to 40,900.
Man, I don't have a way to analyze it.
No,
I'm just saying it just
But
from
here's
a,
the thing, is if we said, hey, it was a good price for, we approved the project at 18,000 for the design portion of the project,
Yeah.
right? And as part of it, when we went out for bid, we got the bid back, we said, hey, we can't afford that
Yeah,
project as the
yeah.
way we designed it. If we bid it out 2 more times and we had to do another set of plans, another set of revisions, another
Yeah,
set of,
I get you.
all that paperwork for 2 bids, and the second one, the final bid wasn't as much work, but it was some. I mean, essentially, we got a little bit of it's less cost than the original scope of the work, but it was pretty much a lot of the same work from an architect standpoint and from the engineer standpoint.
I guess
And
maybe.
it wasn't, it's not, I'm sorry.
No, maybe going forward, I certainly sat through all those redesigns. I mean, I understand that. I sat through and we did it for a reason. But maybe it's my fault for not understanding that it would have, I guess at the time, and I'm not saying it would necessarily change my opinion, but it would have been better at the time to say, and you do realize that as we do this, these costs are gonna go from this to that.
That's fair. That's understood. I looked at it this way, at least. If I say originally $18,000, what was $18,000 gonna get me? Well, there was gonna be some interface with the customer, with us. There'd be a design process, maybe a preliminary design and a final design. Then there's gonna be a bidding process. So I'm gonna get that scope of work for $18,000. Now I say, okay, well, I get an extra 15 grand in costs. All right, well, where'd that come from? Well, we got a couple grand in reporting. I'm using round numbers. I mean, obviously. So you say, okay, well, all right, we were at 18 for the original project, but you're really asking, knock off a couple grand for some additional reporting requirements for this federal requirement. So now we're at somewhere around $12,000 to $13,000. From my recollection, I can recall 2 redesigns, one that involved still an additional or secondary room, and one that just involved the restrooms. And in addition to that, through that process, we also talked about whether or not we'd move bathrooms, whether we'd keep them, whether we could put utilities inside or outside to save costs, whether we put them on the roof. So there was some work involved in the HVAC. Then I factor in that the original 18,000 included 1 bidding, and I came back and asked for it to be rebid twice, which, in all fairness, is really, as far as I'm concerned, 1.5 times, because the second rebidding, which would be ultimately the 3rd bidding, was really just redoing what was done the second time within a certain scope, because the county wasn't satisfied with the process. But it still involves a very deliberate process. So I look at an $18,000 original cost, probably about $13,000 to rebid it twice, and 1 major redesign and 1 change to that. So to me, I can see where that scope of work aligns with the original $18,000. Although, as you say, I'm not happy about it, and I can understand from your perspective, you're saying, geez, we were plugging along and all of a sudden, hey, we got a change order for $15,000. Holy smokes, we didn't understand that. I think, I've stated it as much as I can. I think this federal process of taking tax dollars, tying strings to them and giving them back so you get 80 cents on your dollar is a pain in the butt. But until we had a better system, we either refuse $250,000 in grant dollars or we follow the rules, so.
Just one comment. My understanding is, you said the second bid, one of the bidders left something off the bid sheet and a $60,000 item. When I bid government work, you have to put front money up and sign a contract. If this guy underbid something because he left something out, so what? That's his problem. I don't understand why he sent it out for bids a third time.
Because they had a portion of the work, you know, they had it listed on there, I think, but they didn't put in the proper amount for it. They, you know, had a typographical error. And he said, hey, we were off by, I think it was like 50 grand or something like that. And we said, well, you know, you're not gonna do the work for this other number that's 50 grand less. Would you do it for, you know, your proper total? And they said, yeah, that's what we meant to put on anyway. So, you know, that's what we'll do. They would still be the low bidder, and we would use that bid. But we went to the county and said, hey, this is really, you know, it's a minor informality that we'd like to waive, you know, as the deciding party.
They're a low bidder.
They're the low bidder. Can we do that? They said, no. It does not meet their, you know, their purchasing process for block grant projects. So they required us to bid it out. We could have went to the second bidder, but they were in excess of what even this additional rebid came back at.
It's like it was like 255 to 370
Yeah.
or something.
But if I understand what you're telling me, we were nice guys and we let the guy off the hook when he made a $60,000 mistake.
Well, you can't put a gun to the guy's head and say, do the job for
Yeah,
60
he
grand
refused to
under.
do the work. He said, my bid is no good.
Right.
That was
Okay,
his
well.
position.
Okay.
Got time for one more question?
Joe,
All the time in the world.
bring him.
You got all night.
Okay, I got lunch back here. So the project originally bid on June 15th. It went back out, if I'm looking at these dates right, August 15th. So here's what I can tell you being in construction. Anytime anybody with initials behind their name, when you call them, you're paying for them, typically, okay? Couple fellows over there. So August should have been, the flag should have went up. I believe. It should have been, hey, there's gonna be an additional engineering cost. But then we did it again in September. Still hadn't heard anything. Now, October 4th, a letter gets issued, okay? And it's clearly a couple months after the additional cost basically hit your shop. So, I know that architects and engineers are quite pricey. I know what we pay in the private sector, so, you know, I don't know what your rates are, but honestly, with this overrun, I understand how we got to it. I do get it. I would have liked to have seen some type of notice prior to October 4th or even tonight. Surely, you know, understanding what the labor rates are at your shop would also be handy, and in future endeavors that we work with Wade Trim, so.
Yeah, and I mean, Dave's sitting there, but I'll be completely frank, you know, I mean, Dave and I had a long discussion on this project, and part of my frustration was with the architect, and that's part of the reason, you know, that Dave is not charging their premium on that part of the project, because I said, you know, we said, here's how much money we have for this project. You know, I mean, I understand we have to pay for the services, so that's why you're approving this additional amount. But, you know, we said, here's how much we have. You say you're an expert in this field, design a project so I can afford it. And he failed. You know what I mean? Twice. And so we had to make those changes and do it. And that's part of the reason Dave worked with us on the billing. And I appreciate that you'd like this sooner, because part of the reason we were waiting on it, and was the county was being difficult, and then in addition to that, we were running into issues where they lost an employee who was our point person on the project, and they hadn't put a person in to replace them. So we wanted to make sure that there wasn't, since we had to come to the board, we didn't want to come twice. We wanted to make sure we had everything that we needed, and there wasn't gonna be, well, there's this additional reporting thing, it's another, $2,000 on top that we didn't talk about, than last time, so, we had the meeting last week, that's why I had it on the agenda 2 weeks ago. We had the meeting last week though, because it got pushed, so that's why it's on tonight.
So was this in-house, engineer, architect that quote unquote, I believe failed us? Is that what you said? Is that what,
I mean, he designed what we told him, but maybe missed the mark on cost and gave us
Okay.
some bad advice.
is that in-house?
No, it's a subcontractor.
Okay.
One more question from me.
Sure.
I'm thinking back to the fire station that we built that actually had a contract. You'd appreciate this, because you probably don't know about this. He had a clause in there that when you get into winter work, he got a premium for his work. We don't have any kind of clause like that in our contract with this guy, do we?
For the
We actually
contractor?
paid more after like December 1st or
Yeah,
something
no,
for the
are you
fire
talking
station.
for the contractor?
Yes,
No, the contractor, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a lump sum for the project?
but there's no disclaimer in there if they don't get it done by a certain date or something.
No, we were upfront.
Because that's
on
what
it
happened
at
with the
time.
fire station. We had a huge overrun because of that.
Let me clarify that. If the contractor, the contractor's given us a lump sum price to do the work. The contract does allow if there are changed conditions outside the control of the contractor that lead to additional costs or additional effort on the project, that they can come back and ask for an amendment before they do the work. In this case, since the project was delayed, not by the contractor's actions, but by waiting for DTE to come and move the materials around and move the lines and whatnot, it probably would be, justifiable expense if they ended up incurring, cold weather, concrete curing costs. When we met with them last week and talked about it, we didn't think that was gonna be the issue. We're talking about that specifically at the meetings.
But they were
And at this
pretty
point,
much
they've
done with
changed it.
concrete already, right?
Right.
They've got the footings and stuff are in, they're gonna put the walls up and then they're gonna, when they get ready, they're gonna get the framing up, is my understanding, and then they're gonna pour the slab in between, so it won't,
Are these walls block or are they frame or what?
Stick, yeah.
Pardon?
They've got a couple
The
of
walls
blocks
are-
to go on, and then there's stick building on top of that.
So the concrete floor, if it's not poured yet, it'll be poured after there's a roof over it.
Right.
Shouldn't be a problem with,
Right,
Right.
and that's what we talked about at the last meeting, is that they were able to get the footings in and the concrete block in before the cold weather hit, and that the slab wouldn't be an issue because it would be closed already.
okay.
So, although that, under your existing contract, I just wanna make sure you understand.
Right.
Under the existing contract, that is an eligible additional expense if the situation warrants it, but we don't think that we're gonna get into that situation with this contract. We've already discussed it with them.
All right, any further discussion?
The only thing I would like to know for future is I'd like to know who designed this for you, for future projects.
George Hartman Associates.
Carpenter?
George
George
Hartman.
Hartman, okay.
Hartman.
Thank you.
Yep, spelled Hartman.
Okay.
Hartman, two N's, one N. All right. Any further discussion, board? Hearing none, we have a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Tominello to approve the additional expenses for the senior center additions, engineering services at an amount, excuse me, of $15,552.81. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next on the agenda, item F1. Board members, Public Act 152 requires that municipalities annually opt out of the requirements of the act. Otherwise, certain mandatory employee health care provisions must be implemented. The employee health care plan negotiated in our collective bargaining agreements is the same for all employees and has a high deductible. However, it does not meet the cap requirements for PA 152. Therefore, I make a recommendation that we opt out of PA 152 for 2017.
So moved.
Is there support?
Support.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Tominello, support by Mr. Vatanti. Discussion, board members?
So do you know what this is?
Yeah, I would, excuse me, I would say that basically, there's nothing we can do now, you're under contract, but I feel that the state of Michigan probably has their reasons for coming up with these numbers, and we should try to make an effort without hurting the employees to try to work within that framework in the future.
So this
We
is-
can't do anything about it now.
So this is the act that I was referring to earlier that the school employees get hit with, right? So, Public Act 152 says, and I might get this wrong, so don't hold me to this exactly. There's a hard cap that the Department of Treasury every year says this is what the amount is that you can spend on healthcare. It was like $15,800 or something last year. I haven't seen where they've put the one in for this coming year, because I've been looking for it, because that affects how much you get taken out of your paycheck. Or, you pay 20% of the total amount of the health insurance for the school employees. Now, what they did was they blanketed or covered everybody in the public sector as well. And what we're doing here is, every year, the board opts out. I've voted no every year. The board opts out, so we can continue to pay whatever amount we want for the health insurance. But if we were not to opt out, I don't think it matters what the contract says. I know the fire department contract says that if we don't do this, then we have to sort of negotiate for a different plan, I believe is the language. Something like that. I remember having that discussion. But that's what it is. Basically, you pay 20% or you have a hard cap.
Okay.
And to me, to opt out is a tool to bring the control to the local level. As we negotiate a contract, we negotiate the entire term of the contract, not just healthcare or,
No, you're right.
it's, so if we were to negotiate a contract and say, oh, we're doing hard cap, they might ask for more pay because they have to pay more into this. So this gives us that local control to negotiate the contract that's best for Harrison Township, not let some Lansing bureaucrat tell me how much I should give people. It's a local control. This Board of Seven knows better than any of the legislators in Lansing.
It's also important to note that by going to the plan that we have with the employees, the plan that we've collectively agreed to is a plan where there's I guess you might say, a financial benefit to the employee by not unnecessarily or over-utilizing their health care benefits, because they bear some cost in the plan. So where this plan has really paid some dividends for us is, I believe, the first renewal was actually a reduction, but in about a 4-year period, I want to say it had gone up something like a collective total amount of 6%. So there has been a real, it's a joint effort. The employees came to us and said, well, we don't want to be faced with the hard cap and whatever comes with that. But we said, all right, well, we want to also look at some plans. The plan we did look at did limit our renewal costs, and I think that's significant or important to keep in mind. So, but, it is what it is. We've negotiated some level of benefit. We used to have 3 different plans across 3 different employee bargaining units. We've been able to put them all on the same plan. We've been on the same plan for some employees since 2011, and it seemed to have worked for us, so.
Well, part of the reason why I brought that up was because I've had feedback from various people out in TV land or wherever, and I wanted to bring this forward. You've given good explanations as to why we do things. At the end of the day, an employee is looking at their total compensation package.
Correct.
And if you take that away and they have to pay $5,000, which we pay half of, I believe, for that high deductible, if they had to pay all of that, then they're gonna try to get more in the form of wages and benefits.
And they're gonna look at comparables in other communities and
Right.
say, okay, well, what do you get, and so on and so forth.
I understand all of that, but I just wanted to bring it up so that people understand why things are the way they are.
Absolutely. All right. Any further discussion, board? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. Batanti to opt out of Public Act 152 for 2017. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Thank you, board. Next on our agenda, item F2, board members, at our November 14th, 2016 regular board meeting, authorization was granted to hire a temporary employee in our assessing department at a rate of $12.50 to $15.50 per hour with no benefits for a maximum of 200 hours. The name of this temporary employee was to be brought back before the board. We did interview a Miss Lisa Gergenti. She interviewed well. She was chosen for the position. She does not have any prior assessing experience or any special, skill set that would give her any other rate than the base rate. So she's been hired at a position paying $12.50 per hour. But as a part of the process, we do bring it back to the board for concurrence.
You know, I'm just gonna say this, it would be nice to have something about who this person is, rather than just the name.
Well,
You know, we
we
always
interviewed
get
her,
No, I understand that, but nobody has even employment application, or,
I could certainly make one available to you. I mean, she did fill out when she came in.
well, I mean, we've always had something attached where it says, I went to school here, or whatever. I mean, I don't have a problem hiring this person at all. I'm just saying, I think in the future, it'd be nice if everybody would have a little bit more than just a name.
Well,
Because I don't remember any time that we don't have anything else.
So if this person is probably gonna be a field employee then, going out measuring structures or what have you?
That's correct.
For reassessment
Or
purposes?
assisting in that process,
Yeah,
yep.
so there shouldn't be any real training involved.
Hold a tape measure. I mean, I don't wanna minimize it. There's certainly things that you need to be mindful of, but the way that the assessing department explained it to me, would it be somebody that, just good common sense, maybe help
And they-
take notes, photographs, measurements, things like
And
that.
this person has basic office skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to remember what her degree was.
She was
She's a
She
teacher.
was a teacher.
Yeah, she had gone to school to become an educator, and if I recall, she had worked for a
taught
period of
while,
time.
And she subbed while she was raising her family.
Right, and then she had some smaller children, and so this part-time work seemed to fit well in her schedule with having, younger children at home. But, I mean, has a 4-year degree in education. I don't remember, I think it was elementary education. Point is through the interview process, she certainly interviewed very well. Her educational background was good, and her work experience, that sort of a thing. And the reality is, this